Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining again. Another entry of Cone Diaries. It's been a couple of weeks. Just did a trip up north, and I want to talk a little bit about some of that experience and as it relates to some of the other topics that we've discussed here. For those of you that have been here already and kind of know the material and my background, go forward a couple minutes. For those that haven't, I talk a little bit about philosophy, metaphysics, and yoga, mysticism, as it relates to some of my own personal experience. I've been studying yoga and mysticism and philosophy for the better part of 3 decades. And I'm also a systems engineer and a computer scientist. So metaphysics is really the area that I feel like I've pushed the envelope on. I've written about 6 books. I have a blog, snowconenewyorkcity.com. You should check that out if you're more sort of academically inclined. I've also written a book of poetry as well, to try and sort of crystallize some of the concepts. But that's basically the basis of my work. Primarily what I've been doing is I've been recording some of these sessions so that I can kind of synthesize and crystallize some of the more kind of academic and more obtuse topics that are in some of my books for people to sort of listen to and hear, rather than have to sort of bury themselves and read in sort of a pretty technical form. Because some of the philosophy and the metaphysics it is technical. And so that's the intent here. Hopefully a couple of people pick this up and find it of value and of use. Okay. So, I've done a bunch of these already. We've talked a little bit about, what I'll call sort of the spiritual and the metaphysical foundations for some of the principles. And they are based upon, and these are kind of important, what I would call kind of core metaphysical constructs that that underpin the majority of my work and some of the and pretty much the basis for the understanding that I've come to about the nature of the world, the nature of your mind and body and spirit, and how they're related to each other, and what the hell we're doing here, what we should be doing, what we should be focused on. Okay, so ultimately, the core concept is that you are not your body, okay? And that the world is not, while the world appears material and, you seem separate from objects, this is more of an illusory, an illusion than it is actually real. For those of you that have trouble with this concept, that can't quite kind of turn that corner, I would suggest that you read the near-death experience literature and just sort of start from there. You have this concept of some level of awareness that exists after the body dies. So that's only possible if you're not the body. It's really not complicated, honestly. And yet it's obfuscated into this sort of the brain, and consciousness sort of arises from this sort of physical. No, it doesn't. This is a vehicle that our souls are inhabiting. Okay. You have to get there, because if you don't get there, you're lost, honestly. So we start with that. Pretty much all my work is, and this is really where my systems engineering and computer scientist background comes in. All of my work is pretty much from the ground up. I don't make any assumptions about, I've read a lot of philosophy, particularly Eastern philosophy, but also a lot of Western philosophy too. I don't take any of those things for granted. What basically I look at is sort of take the scientific foundations, which start with physics primarily, and marry that with what we know about psychology primarily, and then marry that to a philosophical system that's based on those principles from which we can derive what the hell's going on here. Okay, because it's not, as I've mentioned before, it's not necessarily what it appears to be, but that's okay. That's okay. So what I want to talk about today for a couple of minutes is more sort of socioeconomic and sort of ethical ideas. Okay. And as it relates specifically to my trip up north and my experience in New York City, I went to the Garden to actually watch the Rangers play. Go Rangers. And experience really in the heart of commerce, you know, in Western society today. And how I think that that needs to be transformed to reflect, you know, not just how the world is constructed, which is this idea of metaphysics again, but also to reflect the kind of the transformed world that we seem to be moving into or shifting into. And that's this idea of this sort of 3D to 5D ascension, okay, which for those of you who are in the spiritual community, you're very tuned into this. For those that aren't, it's a little bit, it may be a little bit difficult to grasp. But primarily, this idea is that spurred on by the pandemic, okay, or the pandemic was spurred on by this transformation, one or the other, cause and effect, it's hard to say, but that there is this rebellion against this sort of materialistic, control-based structure, socio-economic structure that's really been, in many respects, imposed upon the Western mind. And there's this sort of rebellion against that. There's the media and what we eat, and sort of this idea that, you know, we have been kept, and I'm not going to talk about conspiratorial aspects of this, but in some sense, we've been kept in this very low energy based state where where the world looks very much like we're distinct from the world around it. And, you know, a very sort of dense and gross and sort of material, pleasure seeking kind of mode of being, okay, that we see in all the ads and, you know, and TV and pornography, and just sort of everything is objectified, right? And it's sort of a cloud-based delusion, right? I mean, because what you ultimately have is, if you sort of derive an understanding of reality based on physics and some core philosophical principles, you get to this fundamental tenet that you are not necessarily, you know, in this vehicle, okay, that you are separate from and distinct from it first and foremost. And that, in fact, and this is a very core and old and long-standing Eastern philosophical idea, that you are in fact non-different from everybody else, that we are all expressions of the divine, and that everything is alive. That's actually a very Stoic idea, which fed into old Judeo-Christian theology. This sort of idea of the spirit and prana. Okay, it sort of underlies almost all the ancient philosophical systems. Certainly, the stuff that came out of the Mediterranean, and even going into India, and even in China, you have this sort of idea of qi, which underpins pretty much the entire, you know, theo-philosophical system over there as well. So it's a very old idea, and it's very consistently represented in really all the old systems. Is that really what's true, and is this sort of source energy that we kind of manifest. And that sort of feeds into my work in philosophy and metaphysics, again, in particular, which I cover actually in a book that's coming out in hopefully soon, next month or two. It's called Metaphysics Reconsidered. And it looks at some of the ideas of Kant and Western philosophy and sort of bridges them with Eastern philosophy. Ultimately, what we come up with is this idea of a metaphysics of awareness, which is that it's not consciousness necessarily, it's a very loaded word, but this idea of awareness. And that you can kind of shift your level of awareness, okay? And I talk about these 7 spheres, whether it's your personal or your family or your work, or your community or your society, or your nation state, or humanity at large, or the earth, okay, or the cosmos, these sort of layered bases of awareness. And the idea is that you can basically project and or associate yourself, your being, your own awareness with all these different layers of awareness. And it's sort of a tiered structure. Harmony of the spheres is what I typically refer to it as, and it's a very old idea that comes out of the Hellenic philosophical tradition. And when you understand and realize that the only logical conclusion you can come to is that you are not this body, right? Then the question becomes, okay, what are you? And is the material world as distinct from you as you think it is? And a lot of things start to break down and become blurry as you start spending time in this sort of metaphysical space, right? But so I call it the metaphysics of awareness. And that's a term that I use throughout some of my work, and I define it in particular in the latest book, Metaphysics Reconsidered. And this is while it's consistent with and aligned with Eastern philosophy, okay, prana, chi, that sort of whole idea, right? Union of consciousness, and so on, Sat Chitananda, existence, bliss, knowledge, absolute, right? These very old, again, primarily Eastern philosophical ideas. They emerge from philosophical inquiry, which is a rational inquiry, right? And particularly as it's married to modern day physics, okay? In particular, quantum mechanics, which shows you that, locality in and of itself is a bit of a mirage, I guess you could say, or that at sort of a subatomic level, everything is connected, interrelated, entangled, right? These are well understood, scientifically proven principles at this point. There's also been studies that have done that connect the mind with the material world. That connection seems pretty clear. So where is the difference between the mind and matter? What's the distinction, right? I think, therefore I am, right? Cogito ergo sum, right? Descartes sits sort of at the founding principle of Western philosophy. But at the same time, that when you go to, when you play a home game, the odds makers know that it's good for an NFL, for example, it's good for a field goal. So if you bet money on something, you know that they've already built in the fact that mind, collective mind in particular, can have a effect on outcomes. Like that's not conjecture. You know what I'm saying? So we know these things, and yet, we're constantly sort of on our heels, moving around the world, and the world is against me. What's the difference between you and the world? I mean, these are the questions that, while they seem sort of a little bit out there, ethereal, you might say, intellectual questions, what are the practical considerations are that if in fact the world around you is created and manifest as a function of and a reflection of what's going on in here and in here, that changes everything. Particularly if you marry that with the idea that you are in effect not only non-different from the world, but are non-different from, at some level of metaphysics of awareness, some level you are non-different from all of the people and all of the living things that are on this planet and in the cosmos. So from an engineering perspective, we build this system from the ground up. We take some very basic fundamental tenets around physics, around psychology, Freudian and Jungian in particular, this idea of the collective unconscious, archetypes, themes that come up. This is part of the sort of collective psyche that we not only manifest, are a part of, but also can contribute back to, okay? And then, of course, the Freudian ideas of desire and behaviorism, and we don't deny that necessarily. We just feel that it's incomplete. And so needs to be combined with sort of some Jungian principles to get a sort of full sense of, how is, what drives the human form, given its basic desires and needs, and how does that connect with, the collective humanity at large, which is more of a sort of a Jungian idea. And so following some notes. So we marry these ideas, the metaphysics and the spirituality aspect of life, when you start to fully appreciate and understand some of these things, and we marry that with very Judeo-Christian ideas around personal responsibility and accountability, and basic morality and ethics. Okay, these sit at the core of Old Testament writings, and also certainly are fundamental to Jesus's teachings in terms of love thy neighbor, and um, um, and so the basic 10 commandments, right? So what gets lost sometimes is, I don't believe in religion, I don't believe in God. Okay, it's all good. No one's asking you to believe in God. Can't see him, can't touch him, whatever, you don't have a relationship with, it's all good. Believe in God. But yeah, if you spend a little bit of time trying to understand the nature of existence and reality, this world that you're in, you reach a basic set of conclusions, not only about the metaphysics of awareness, but the interconnectivity and your fundamental relationship to the state of not only your life, the state of your family, and the state of your community, the state of your state, the state of humanity, and the state of the earth. So you have a relationship with it, probably more impactful than you might consider. But these are metaphysical principles and ideas. These are conclusions, rational conclusions based upon what we know about the nature of existence. That you are, in fact, non-different from these different, layers of existence. Okay, which the most gross and subtle is the sort of physical material layer that we live in and inhabit most of the time. But that's not the only worlds that we inhabit. In our dreams, we have a totally different reality. It's sort of template-based reality that Bashar talks about. He's an interesting character. I won't get into him too much, but if you know who he is, he's fascinating. But he talks about it sort of a template-based reality, which is the archetypes, the collective unconscious. This is very much part of our being. You cannot remove yourself from it in terms of who you are. You also live in sort of a dream state, maybe a third of your life, maybe a fourth, a fifth, whatever it is. It is part of your reality. This idea of mind and its relationship to matter that we've already established. So you see how the lines start to get very blurry as you start to really peel back some of these layers. And these are scientific, principles. These are engineering-based principles. How is it constructed? What do we know about physics? And then based upon that, what other principles that can we derive out of these systems of metaphysics? And this is the core of Western philosophy and also Eastern philosophy. Ethics and morality are derived from the rational foundations of our understanding of existence, not the other way around. And the Judeo-Christian tradition is no different than, whether it's Lao Tzu, the Upanishads, and Hinduism, okay, or, Zoroastrianism, in terms of basic behavioral tenets, or, by the way, Islam, basic behavioral tenets that are supposed to not only be fundamental to your spiritual growth, to who you are, but also the society at large. And this is where I think that we've gotten completely lost in the West. And again, relative to my trip up north, there's some basic things that people are missing. And by the way, this is very much a note to self as much as it is a note to you. Okay, so there's things that we need to constantly remind ourselves of, because we get so wrapped up in the illusion. This is real. This table is real. My needs are real. They need to be met, right? And they need to be met if they, even if that means, being rude or unpleasant to someone else because we're not in a good mood or whatever. You get wrapped up in this idea, particularly a culture that's constructed based on, greed. I need this, I need that. You need to get everything as quickly as possible. And Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this in terms of personal responsibility. This is the Judeo-Christian idea that they get very right. Take care of your own business, treat other people properly. behave as a standing member of society as best as you can. Not only set an example for others, but to create the foundation of the society that you wish to live in and you wish to create. Nobody else is solving this problem for us. Everybody's out there complaining about the state of the world, and nobody wants to change their own life. This is the problem. And as we move into another way of being and another way of constructing society, we must incorporate and integrate these basic ideas about the world not necessarily being a material, materialistic and objectively as real as we think that it is. And as these distinctions, these layers break down, what you realize is that karma is a very real scientific principle, just like Newtonian mechanics, okay, is a very real principle. Every, equal and opposite action has an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, that's a physics, principle of physics. It's the way it works at that level of being, right? That material level of being in terms of measurement phenomena, in terms of force and velocity, how we measure that, the math works. Karma is the same idea. You go and if you're annoyed and you're pissed off at someone, whatever, and you say some things, or whatever, it's like that it's coming back to you because you are non-different from the experience. The experience itself is you experiencing yourself behaving in such a manner. And the point is so that you understand the nature of existence so that you can evolve. And so that the divine can experience itself in any one way. So if you can't see that, if you are ignorant of the connection between you and whatever experience that you're having, you will experience it from the other perspective. That's karma. Until you fully understand and appreciate the nature of what it is that's happening here. All of us are moving towards the same place. Some people it's going to take a little longer. That's okay. It takes as long as it takes. If you're here, it means you probably have started to understand that things aren't necessarily quite what they appear to be. And the ethics and the morality derive from the philosophy, from the physics, from the metaphysics, from the psychology, okay, from this idea of this metaphysics of awareness. From the perspective of awareness, we have an experience that's rooted in this physical being, but you have also the ability to tap into, understand, relate to awareness that not only is with other beings, but also at the collective level as well. This is spirituality this is sort of evolution of growth of the persona, evolution of the growth of who you identify with, who you think you are. And there's sort of all these different layers, right? Until ultimately you're one with the divine, one with everything, the source, the creator. It goes all the way up and all the way down. So you have a transformation, a global transformation that's occurring right now. And there's things that are impacting socioeconomic areas as well as the spirituality aspect of it as well. The spiritual community right now is, they're calling it an ascension from a 3D to a 5D based reality, which is more of a material and an objective, greed and me-based mindset to a sort of a heart and a more of a collective and open-based mindset. And this sort of way of being, ascending to this sort of this higher dimensional being, which is a more, which is a higher vibrational frequency, requires a socioeconomic infrastructure. Can't all, be working in sort of the old system and have this new mindset that's not always compatible. Now, there's some situations where it might be and some situations where it not be. I am not in any way suggesting, and much of the spiritual community is, that's a significant part of it, but I am not in any way suggesting that you abandon certainly your responsibilities that you have, or professionally, personally, or otherwise. Transformation takes place within. You have an opportunity to transform the world you're around you. Abandoning it, leaving it, yeah, it's well, I don't want, okay, but like, we have to leave some sort of infrastructure for the next several set of generations. Nobody else is cleaning up the mess. I mean, it's kind of part of the message here, right? We have a responsibility to right things as best we can, which includes, by the way, the destruction of the earth in and of itself as the source of all life. It goes at that level, right? That's our collective responsibility. And you're starting to see a mindset sort of merge that understands these interrelationships in a way that, historically we've rejected. Okay. So this idea of love thy neighbor and, treat others as you would treat yourself is a sort of a metaphysical conclusion. It's a philosophical deduction. It's not a theological idea. Okay. You are non-different from all of the people that you surround yourself with, and really from the earth, the energy in the earth, and the energy that is fundamental to and to the cosmos. You are non-different from that. You might think that you are, but you're not. You're a different sort of creative spark, you might call it. So that inversion of your mindset sort of yields a different way that you behave and operate through the world. And this is part of where I want to talk about this transformation that's occurring. You had in the pandemic an opportunity for like a shock to the system for everybody to sort of sit and reflect on what they wanted their life to be. They didn't go to the office. A lot of businesses shut down. A lot of people really got hurt, okay, particularly economically. And, it was 18 months, 24 months. We're starting to come back now as the vaccines are starting to be rolled out. And what we're starting to see now as the economy, certainly in the West, starts to ramp up again, you're starting to see labor shortages and supply chain impacts. Okay, whether it's the creation of cars or the creation of laptops. Okay, there's a chip shortage right now. There's supply chain shortages. Gas prices are starting to go up. Okay, the service industry can't find people enough. Okay, fast enough. There's a bunch of airline cancellations because they're understaffed. Okay, they can't find people to go and have these jobs because everybody's so angry and annoyed and pissed. No one wants these jobs. So wages will go up and there will be inflation. Okay, there will also be weather-based events like we had in Texas last year, where there was 6 days of terribly cold weather. People didn't have heat and some people died. Okay, there was a big nor'easter that came through the Northeast. These extreme weather conditions will continue. They will persist. And you will have supply chain effects. You have supply chain impacts because everything is on a thread as it stands. So any impact to the system is going to really create a lot of supply chain problems. So you need to at least understand that this is part of the transition going from A to B necessarily as the economy shifts. And there'll be automation and different things that can be leveraged in order to get us from A to B. But fundamentally, what needs to happen is organizations and society needs to sort of reorganize itself based upon principles that reflect what we know and where science is. And this is involved in being patient with your neighbor, cultivating relationships with your neighbor, trying to help people. Okay, you see homeless people in New York, help them. They don't want to be homeless. In fact, they represent opportunities for you and your own personal growth to give, because in giving, you recognize and you reinforce the idea that you are not this mind-body complex and that you are, in fact, interconnected to everything. This is a higher order of being. And understanding it is not enough. You need to actually implement it, which means every one of your interactions with every human being is an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity to share energy with someone and love, ultimately, that you know who they are, that you recognize them, and you recognize that they have their own challenges and tribulations, okay? These are all opportunities. And so while the spiritual community is like, well, I'm going to take some mushrooms, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to have this amazing experience, and it's going to transform my life. Hey, that's great. I don't take anything away from that, okay? But you know what's really hard is operating in the world as a spiritual person. and being that joy and that positive energy to everybody around you as best as you can. That's spiritual growth. You know, these exotic experiences that everybody chases. I mean, look, I've been meditating on and off for 30 years. Okay, I've read all the yogi book, the Upanishads, and all the cities and the powers. I've read all that stuff. Ultimately, what that is getting to is an understanding of how the world is, of what the reality is, such that you can behave in a manner that reflects that greater understanding and create that and cultivate that in the world. That's what all the great sages and the ascended masters through history have taught us. You are one with the Father. That is true. That is a true statement. But to be that and to hold on to that and to sacrifice your life for that principle, which is ultimately what Jesus does, right? Is the ultimate act of self-knowledge, not some sitting in some mountain somewhere. Okay, so that's important to understand. They're built into the Judeo-Christian sort of mindset, this idea of self-responsibility, taking responsibility for your own life and your actions and creating the world that you want. This idea of manifestation, which is big in the spiritual community right now or on TikTok. Well, if it's mind and matter, then you can create, you can create your own world. You create wealth. Yes, you can, but like, what world are we focused on? You just want to create wealth for yourself. You're missing the point. A socio-economic infrastructure needs to be established such that our lives are not only fulfilling, but they are sustainable over time for future generations. This is the task that is at hand for all of us, particularly us that are of means and then are in positions of some authority in this topsy-turvy world that we live in right now, this world of great change, radical change, and great opportunity at the same time. So, in closing, recognize what's happening, that the transformation is occurring. Recognize that there will continue to be shocks in the system. Recognize that the system itself is very fragile right now, primarily due to the fact that we can't get enough people to do these jobs that we were typically used to people doing. They don't want to do the jobs anymore. So the economy is going to have to shift around this. You can't put robots in all these jobs. Okay, you think you can, but you can't. Ultimately, it requires human beings to make this whole chaotic system actually work. So make sure your cars and your computers and all that stuff is actually functional and working, and create and get appointments for that stuff. Make sure that you've got, if you can, redundant internet infrastructure. Make sure you got redundant power. These are investments that some of us can make. Not everybody can make these things. If you're using cell phones, different providers are a good place to start. Again, not everybody can afford to have all these different pieces of tech, but recognize that the things that you think are always going to be on, probably over the next couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of years, there's going to be significant outages. There's an AT&T SMS outage a couple of days ago, knocked out all sorts of systems, signal sign-on systems that rest on that sort of SMS text technology. We were out, we had outages too. People don't understand how interdependent all of these supply chain things are. Like this whole idea with chips, like all of a sudden you can't get a car. And when I have a chip shortage, I can't get a car. Yeah, that's the way it works. We got a global supply chain and you got a little problem over here. And guess what? You got 7 industries that no longer function. So inflation, gas prices, what that's going to mean for the US dollar, those are things that you should start thinking about, particularly if you have savings and how you're going to do that. Cryptocurrency, blockchain tech, yes, that's probably going to be part of the infrastructure of the future. Yes, I'm not suggesting you put all your money in crypto, suggesting that that's probably going to be part of whatever socioeconomic infrastructure we put in place. I don't think nation states are going to fail necessarily, but certainly we need a global push to try and build a more sustainable state for humanity. And hopefully we don't kill each other along the way. So look, in closing, try not to be, and this is a note to self, okay? Not perfect, but try not to be a dick, try not to be a bitch, okay? Do what you can to not only, make it better for your, take care of yourself. Do what you can to make it better for your family. Try and be compassionate as best as you can and understanding as best as you can. Do the same thing for your community, particularly if you have children. Try and create that community that you would like to live in. And, look at other forms of service to give back, whether it's in the community at large, or certainly the politicians and the other people that are trying to help run this place. I mean, Godspeed. Good luck, guys. But the answer's got to start with each of us individually. Okay. So namaste, peace. Hope you guys enjoyed and take something from this. Check out my blog, snowconenyc.com, and have a hell of a day. All right. Cheers.